Karen didn't knock, didn't call, didn't even bother with a sticky note. She just strutted up to my cabin while I was in town for groceries, helped herself to 4 armloads of neatly stacked, hard-earned firewood I'd chopped by hand over the summer, loaded them into the back of her SUV like she owned the forest, and drove off with a smug little wave caught on my trail camera. I might have let it slide, except the next morning she posted on the HOA message board, "Shared resources make stronger communities," tagging a photo of my logs now burning cheerily in her fancy chiminea beside a bottle of wine. No apology. No shame. No offer to replace what she stole. Just a smug manifesto about community togetherness, after trespassing on private land and stealing a winter's worth of heat. That's when I called my buddy Mike, the local exterminator, and asked if fire ants could survive inside dry birch logs. Turns out they could. So I got to work. I spent the next day replacing every log in my stack with carefully hollowed-out tubes I'd dried over months for carving projects, each one now home to a fresh colony of furious, displaced fire ant. The next evening, I made sure I was sitting on my porch when Karen swaggered back up the hill with that same smug SUV and casually helped herself to another 2 loads. She didn't see me. Or the smile I had to swallow. She just drove off, and I waited. And that night, just as I was brushing my teeth and wondering whether the ants had had time to settle, I heard the shriek echo down the valley, somewhere between a banshee and a pig getting tossed. I opened the HOA app. New post. Urgent. Something wrong with the logs. And attached to it, a blurry photo of her patio engulfed in chaos, wine glasses shattered, her husband holding a flaming stick, and Karen herself mid-slap, trying to swat away a black cloud of 6-legged vengeance. That was when the real war began. The next morning, I woke to a printed notice tacked to my cabin door. Formal HOA complaint. Intentional infestation of property. Signed, of course, by Karen. She accused me of a biohazard attack, as if I'd launched a military-grade pest campaign instead of just giving her exactly what she took. Bill, the HOA president, scheduled an emergency meeting, which was really just code for, sit in the clubhouse while Karen screams and tries to get you fined. The meeting was a circus. She marched in with a neck brace and a full printout of ant bite symptoms from WebMD, slapping down photos like she was presenting evidence at a war crimes tribunal. But then, right as she started her tirade, old man Hendricks, who lives across from me, pulled out his iPad and played the trail cam footage on full volume, Karen hauling my firewood, smiling like the Grinch. The room went quiet. Bill cleared his throat, Karen's face went pink, and someone laughed in the back row. She tried to pivot, claiming it was a neighborhood donation and that I'd left it in a communal stack, even though my land is clearly fenced and posted. Still, she wasn't done. She started printing out HOA bylaws, twisting legal language like spaghetti, and launched a campaign to get me sanctioned for harboring invasive species. Meanwhile, my ant-infested logs became legend. Everyone on the block started locking their shed. Kids whispered about the firewood curse. One neighbor even left a bouquet on my porch with a note, "Thanks for standing up to the queen." I didn't reply. I just restacked my logs, real ones this time, and waited for whatever she'd try next. The answer came soon enough. A week later, I came home to find a line of orange flags dotting the edge of my property. Karen had filed a code violation report claiming my shed was an unapproved structure, and now HOA inspectors were scheduled to survey the area for compliance. When the inspection team arrived, clipboard and confused, Karen came too, smiling like she was about to unveil a body in my crawlspace. They found nothing. No violations, no infestations, nothing wrong except that Karen didn't get the revenge she wanted. But she wasn't done. That night, someone stole my trail cam. Just yanked it clean off the tree. The next morning, Karen posted another photo online. Her backyard, freshly stacked with firewood. Different logs, maybe. Or maybe not. She captioned it, "Starting fresh. Peace over pettiness." I knew better. So I bought another camera. A smaller one. Hid it deeper this time. 2 nights later, the footage showed her creeping into my yard again. This time with gloves, this time checking the logs first. She didn't take any, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. I submitted the footage to Bill. He sighed, said he'd have a word, and then sent a mass email to the neighborhood about respecting property lines during firewood season. Karen responded with a 6-paragraph rebuttal that included phrases like wood-sharing economy and aromatic injustice. I didn't respond. I just waited, because I knew Karen, and I knew she couldn't stop herself. And sure enough, the very next week, someone else's firewood disappeared. This time it was Marla and Jim down the hill, and they were furious. Their ring cam caught the tail end of Karen's SUV leaving their driveway at 7 a.m., and when they confronted her, she claimed she'd thought it was free for all and that people need to relax. But this time, she messed with the wrong couple. Marla is a retired lawyer, and Jim used to be a game warden. They didn't just file a complaint. They drafted a letter of intent to sue for trespassing, theft, and property damage. Karen tried to talk her way out of it, even brought cookies to their porch, but the moment Jim saw her, he said one sentence that made the whole valley buzz for days. "Ma'am, I'd check your backyard for termites." Because Marla and Jim had been storing reclaimed barnwood, and that stack Karen stole? Yeah. It was infested. Real infestations this time. Not ants. Termites. Wood-boring, structure-hollowing termites that could chew through patio furniture like candy. And suddenly, Karen's smug little backyard turned into a science experiment in karma. I don't know if the universe has a sense of humor. But by then, I was pretty sure the mountain did. And it wasn't done laughing yet. By the time the HOA emergency meeting rolled around that Saturday, the clubhouse smelled like burnt hot dogs, citronella candles, and fragile egos. Karen arrived first, of course, with a rolling suitcase full of printed evidence, dressed like a woman on trial for something noble and misunderstood. She even wore a neck pillow as if she'd barely recovered from the trauma of the ant incident, and dragged the whole thing in behind her with theatrical groans. I showed up with nothing but a travel mug and a grin I didn't bother to hide. The neighbors filtered in slowly, some out of genuine interest, others because they smelled blood in the water and wanted to watch the fallout. Karen's opening speech could have been a TED Talk in delusion. She talked about ecological sabotage, biological weaponry, domestic terrorism with insects, and claimed my malicious intent had nearly cost her husband a toe. The fact that she admitted to taking the firewood only got a passing mention. Borrowed was the word she used, like she'd been forced to help herself to heat in a world gone cold. When she pulled out a photo of a swollen ankle and said it belonged to her dog, someone in the back muttered that she didn't have a dog, and half the room choked on their coffee. Bill, the HOA president, kept fidgeting like a man who wanted to be anywhere else, and after 20 minutes of Karen's voice rising and falling like a community theater production of a legal drama, he finally raised his hand and asked the obvious. "Karen, do you have proof the logs were yours to begin with?" That silenced the room. Karen blinked like she hadn't anticipated that question. Her mouth opened, then closed, and she sputtered something about communal understanding, and unspoken agreements, and neighbors being generous when supplies are limited. Bill sighed so hard I thought the windows might fog up. Then came my turn. I stood up, said a single sentence. "I have trail cam footage of the theft," and pressed play on my phone. The room watched, in perfect silence, as Karen helped herself to my firewood, pausing only once to pick her nose and look around. When the video ended, there wasn't even a need for commentary. Karen muttered something about selective editing, but it didn't matter. People had seen enough. Still, she wasn't finished. She stood again and demanded that I be fined for endangering public safety, claiming that fire ants posed a risk to children, elderly neighbors, and pets. She actually used the phrase, chemical warfare through insects, which made someone in the front row spit coffee out their nose. I responded with the obvious. If you hadn't stolen the logs, there wouldn't have been any ants in your yard. But Karen was on a roll now. She proposed a new HOA bylaw banning the storage of insect-attracting materials, which was clearly aimed at me but ended up infuriating Marla and Jim, who pointed out that half the cabins on the mountain use stacked wood. The debate spiraled. Tempers rose. Karen accused 3 people of bias, 2 of harassment, and at least 1 of mansplaining. Bill finally called a break and stepped outside to pretend to take a phone call, leaving the rest of us to stew in the mess. During the break, I noticed something strange. Karen was talking to a man I hadn't seen before. He looked too clean-cut for the mountain, polished in that HOA enforcer way that meant trouble. They were whispering near the door, and every now and then, he glanced at me like I was the raccoon that kept tearing up his trash bins. I filed his face away. When we reconvened, the vote on disciplinary action failed spectacularly. Only Karen voted in favor. But what she lacked in votes, she made up for in strategy. The next morning, I found a fresh violation notice on my porch, this time citing unpermitted structural additions on my cabin, specifically my woodshed, which had been there for 12 years and had been approved back when Bill's predecessor still ran the place. I called Bill, who sounded exhausted, and admitted that someone had nudged the board to revisit old permits. I asked him point-blank if Karen was behind it. He didn't answer, which meant yes. I called my cousin Nate, a lawyer in town, and sent him pictures of the shed, the ant logs, the violation letter, and the ring footage. Nate called back laughing, said it was the dumbest thing he'd seen all week, and wrote me a formal cease and desist letter addressed to the HOA, warning them against harassment, retaliation, and selective enforcement. I printed it out and hand-delivered it to Bill the next morning while he was trimming his roses. He read it, winced, and told me quietly that Karen had also demanded an audit of my septic system. I didn't even know HOA rules could audit that. Then things escalated. 2 days later, Marla called me from down the hill. Her firewood was gone. Again. Only this time, she'd caught the thief red-handed, literally. She'd spotted Karen loading wood into her car just after dawn and confronted her mid-lift. Karen's excuse? It looked abandoned. Marla, being a retired lawyer, didn't waste time arguing. She went straight to the sheriff. Now here's where it got really interesting. The sheriff, upon seeing the footage Marla handed over, recognized Karen immediately. Turns out she'd once filed a noise complaint against a church bell. Twice. He agreed to swing by and have a conversation, which in small-town language means, time to knock it off. Karen's reaction? She doubled down. She filed a harassment report against Marla, claimed she felt unsafe, and then posted a 12-paragraph rant on the HOA app about bullying behavior from certain property owners with too much time and not enough compassion. The replies were a mix of stunned silence and snark. One anonymous comment just said #Loggate. The phrase stuck. People started whispering it at HOA events. Someone taped it to a street lamp. Someone else made a fake campaign sign that said, "Vote Loggate 2025. Karen was furious. She demanded the board ban anonymous posting, but Bill pretended not to hear her. Meanwhile, that clean-cut man from the clubhouse reappeared, this time knocking on my door with a clipboard. His name was Darren. He claimed to be from a subcommittee for Property Standards Enforcement and asked to see inside my woodshed. I told him I'd need a warrant. He looked annoyed and said, "We're just trying to keep the mountain beautiful." I said, "It already is, you're the part that doesn't belong." He left in a huff, but I knew Karen had sent him. The good news? More neighbors were finally waking up to her tactic. Jim organized a community potluck and invited everyone but her. Marla started digging through old HOA records, and I helped her. What we found was gold. Karen had used HOA funds to pay for gravel on a path that led directly to her backyard hot tub, a common access trail that mysteriously dead-ended at her gate. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to question her authority. Enough to make people wonder. Enough to start turning the tide. But the best part? I found an old receipt for the woodshed's approval, signed by Bill himself, back when he still had hair and a spine. I made a